I made a film earlier this morning about the collapse of Britain, and now there's a very interesting article about the Archbishop of Canterbury and his delayed resignation. It's really about institutional accountability and institutional irresponsibility in the UK. So we shouldn't be greatly surprised that the Archbishop of Canterbury follows the direction of all the other chaotic scandals that have been going on in the last 10 years. He is simply saying, this is what my friends do, Paula Venables and others, so I can do the same thing. Maybe he's not even actively involved in any decision-making. The resignation without accountability, the illusion of institutional responsibility. That's really what I suppose I ought to call this video. It's a bit long-winded, isn't it? But the Archbishop of Canterbury's announcement of his resignation, followed by the conspicuous lack of an actual exit date, highlights how this undermines the meaning of accountability. And it's like... do you remember that wonderful song in Blood Brothers? This is payment on the never never, isn't it? It's a metaphor for the broader institutional reluctance to truly reckon with failure. Examples of this are Andrew Malkinson, who endured years of wrongful imprisonment, even when the prison system and the police knew he was wrongly imprisoned because he refused to admit that he'd done anything wrong. He waited decades for compensation, and even when it had been promised, it wasn't delivered. The Windrush victims, many of whom are still battling for justice and compensation, years after it's been promised. The Grenfell survivors, promised reparation and action, but again, facing delays, and actually practically having to genuflect and beg for what should be theirs. It shouldn't be the Grenfell survivors, the Windrush victims, Andrew Malkinson, who begs the government for the compensation. It should be the government who is begging them to accept it. And then there's the Post Office Horizon scandal victims, whose suffering was met with legal battles and staggering delays in sorting out any reparations or repaying back the money which was stolen by the post office. For post office, let's say government. The money which was stolen by the post office, which is quite apart from the compensation which is owed to them and the apology which is owed to them. No apology is worth anything in this country unless it's matched by money now, because nobody can believe what anybody says. The Archbishop Justin Welby's announcement, the outcry from the victims of John Smythe, and the Privy Council's role in setting out the formal exit. Why after 7 years does no one take full responsibility and do the decent thing? That's what one of the survivors has said. But the optics of continued privilege, £85,000 salary, free residence in this wonderful Lambeth Palace. I've been inside it. I know how wonderful it is, by the way. While the victims of abuse languish. Compare the Archbishop of Canterbury's exit to the delays in the compensation for all the injustice we've mentioned. 17 years in prison, Andrew Malkinson, for a crime he didn't commit. A drawn-out legal process to get to be exonerated, and delayed compensation. Windrush, promises of justice drowned in bureaucratic inertia. Grenfell, survivors who lost everything, left to navigate an unresponsive system, while those in power evade responsibility, and Theresa May is late at the gate. The Horizon scandal, thousands of sub-postmasters wrongly prosecuted, wrongly dragged to prison in an instant, and yet when justice needs to be seen to be done, needs to be seen to be put right, it remains piecemeal and tardy. These examples, these 4 examples, illustrate a troubling pattern in modern Britain. Institutions and elites feign commitment to accountability while actually creating mechanisms to delay or dilute the consequences of their action or inaction. There's a symbolic role in resignation which is meaningless without action, without restitution, without change. And resignation is simply a gesture rather than a reckoning. It's a hiding rather than a taking responsibility. It's a veneer of justice which can be peeled away. Look at the elite sanctity of commitment, a promise never cashed in. For victims, this means delays, token gestures, symbolic payouts. And not enough. It's never enough. Why? Because it's done with such a churlish, niggardly attitude. It's so begrudging. Contrast this with the lived experience of survivors, of victims, of whistleblowers. Think of the NHS whistleblowers. So many of them reduced to insanity because of the victimization that they endure from the government, from the NHS, from the legal system, simply for doing their job, for calling out what is wrong in a system which is so badly in need of repair. These people who endure protracted legal battles, media scrutiny, emotional turmoil, ill health. This culture of rhetoric and reality and the difference between the two erodes public trust. Institutions claiming moral authority like the church or the government or major corporations cannot afford to project such hollow gestures. Think of Keith Makin's comments. Appropriate action must be taken. So why are these expectations the exception, not the norm? We need a cultural shift, and we need it now. We need immediate, meaningful action from leaders who fail. We need a transparent mechanism for reparation that prioritizes victims, not bureaucracy. We need to sever ourselves from the blame culture, because that's not the priority. The priority is the victims. It's always the victims. One of the Smythe survivors says, do the decent thing. Well, when will institutions from Lambeth Palace to Westminster truly listen to that call? And we need not to think of the moral failings of these institutions and individuals. We need to think of what is proper accountability, but more, what is the future to look like? Rather than looking at the past and dwelling on the past, we need to think, what do you need to deal with the future? And often it's money. And if you can't give that with good grace, do it fast. Because this is not a demonstration of good grace. And this posturing and delay is more than a kick in the teeth.